Okay, I had a look at this game you sent me, and I noticed you said that you don't feel as comfortable in the openings and that you think the openings are still your problem. Well, I think in this particular game you did fine in the opening. There was no problems with the opening. I'm going to go through the game and I'll make a few comments where I think you can maybe improve your thinking process that may help you. Right, so I'll just stop at the places where I think I can make a useful comment. Okay, so far you're just staying with the opening principles, developing your pieces, castle, make your king safe. So far everything is okay, no problem. Okay, hitting the bishop, and then you bring the knight back a bit, back again. Okay, so if we just rewind there, the move knight to a4, it's not a bad move, it's actually quite a good move, attacking his bishop. However, if you had in mind to just bring it right back, then maybe there was not too much point to the game, because now you lost the tempo. You made two moves with the knight, and black only made one move with the bishop, and now it's black's move again. So you gave black a little extra time here. So let's just go back. When you played knight to a4 and you played the bishop back, maybe you should have looked rather for a way now to improve your position. And one possible way is to develop the queen to h5. Maybe you can switch her over to this side sometime. The queen is pretty active here, and it's not easy for black to make threats against your queen. So I think this would have been a better move than bringing the knight back. Right. Even though bringing the knight back is not a mistake, the point is just you lost some time. Okay, this move indicates possibly your biggest problem that you have in your thinking process at the moment, and that is that you're not thinking about your opponent's ideas. You have to think about your opponent's ideas and decide if they are strong or not. And if they are strong, then you have to find a way to stop them. For example, in this position, black is threatening to play the knight to g4, attacking your h2 square, and it gets a lot of development here on the king side and puts you under a lot of pressure. The problem is this move does nothing to deal with that problem. And a much better move that would have dealt with the problem quite effectively was maybe pawn to h3 or maybe pawn to f3, covering the g4 square and preventing black from coming in here. That would have been more effective. Okay, maybe this is a bit of a tactical error, because a much simpler way to deal with the threat against your f2 pawn was to play the queen to e2. And of course, if he captures you, that's not a problem, because you just take with the rook. If he takes with the bishop, then you get a black knight and a black bishop in turn for your rook and your pawn. So I think that would have been a good way to deal with black's threat. The move bishop to e3 is an interesting idea, but the problem is after bishop takes and pawn takes, you have this nice discovery on black's queen, and black actually made a mistake now by taking a pawn on e3. He should have simply dealt with the threat against his queen and make a counter threat by playing queen to g4, putting more pressure on that e3 pawn. You see, and now you would be under a lot of pressure in this position. Okay, black made a small mistake though, and he played knight takes e3, giving you this opportunity to exchange queens this way. And you probably had to do some calculation here, and you managed to calculate it very accurately, so that's well done. Okay, that's a very nice tactic. Just a pity it doesn't really give you much advantage due to this nice move that black has, the knight to e5 move. That pretty much forces you to just exchange again. Okay, that's the right idea. It's endgame, and your king should come into the center, so you're doing well here. Okay, and here you made another mistake that is similar to the move I referred to earlier when you didn't see your opponent's threats. You see, this is quite a serious threat that black has, playing the knight to c4, checking your king and taking the pawn on b2. So you should have asked yourself, how serious is this threat and do I need to do something to stop it? And probably you would have said, yes, I need to do something to stop it, and one effective way to deal with it was to put the pawn on b3, or maybe to move the king back so that he doesn't have the check with the knight anymore. I probably would have played the move pawn to b3 here, keeping the knight out of c5. Okay, instead you played h4, which allowed him to check and get that pawn. Okay, this move was a bit of a mistake. You see, the king is one of the most important pieces in the endgame stage, and you want to use your king as actively as possible. And by putting your king on c5, you actually trapped your own king. Black should have played his king to b7 now, protecting the pawn on c6. And then you would have had a relatively bad position because your king is kind of trapped. And your king can't do much to join the action. Instead, your opponent luckily didn't play the king to b7. He played knight to a4 check, and here you missed an opportunity. You should have taken the c6 pawn. Okay, so for some reason you missed that. Or maybe you saw a threat that you thought black was threatening, but there isn't actually anything black can do if you just capture the pawn. After taking the pawn, you're possibly going to take the b4 on the next move because you're threatening checkmate as well. Putting your rook on h8, or not checkmate, but you're threatening to play rook h8 check. You're threatening to play there, exchange the rooks, and then take the pawn on b5 as well, and then you're just winning with these pawns running up the board. But you missed that opportunity. Okay, instead you play the king back to b4. Okay, now once black plays his king to b7, protecting the c6 pawn, your king is very, very vulnerable here. Even if it's endgame, you still have to be aware of king safety. Of course, the king is a lot safer in the endgame because there's fewer pieces left, but you still have to be careful, particularly when you get your king trapped in a position like this. And this was unfortunate because now black is threatening all kind of ways to checkmate your king. And after pushing the pawn to e5, indeed, he plays the king to b6, and there's pretty much nothing you can do to stop him from putting the pawn on a5 and checkmating your king. Okay, so let me just quickly give a summary of what I said. First of all, you mentioned your problem is the opening, and I think it's important that you change your mindset on this. A lot of chess players try to, or often think of the opening as their problem. And when often the opening itself is not the problem. The problem is that maybe you're not seeing your opponent's threats, maybe your tactics weren't good enough, but as long as you stick to the opening principles, you should be able to do fine against players up to a rating of maybe 1600. Of course, you need to play good openings, you need to do well in the opening, but admit that the problem so much is not the opening. Let's look at after 7 moves, you get into this position, and here you're castled, and I think white's position is perfectly fine. You can't say that the opening was the problem here. So that's the first thing, is try to not think of the opening as your problem. The second thing is that you tend to sometimes miss your opponent's ideas and you don't do anything to stop it. The example from this game was when you allowed your opponent to, at this point, when you played rook b1, you allowed your opponent to come in with his knight to g4. You should have rather stopped that threat, because it was a threat to attack your king side. Okay, and then later on in the game also there was the third lesson you should think about is that you mustn't miss opportunities. Your opponent is often only going to give you 1 or 2 opportunities in the game. And in this game you did have 1 opportunity. If I just go back to that position again, it was here where your opponent checked you with the knight, and then you unfortunately brought the king back to b4, and you had an excellent opportunity here to play king c6, and you probably would have won the game after that. Okay, so that's my comments on this game. I hope you could learn something, and I'll see you around. Cheers.